Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas, and I'm going to be your host today, and we're going to be talking about why marketing is your first funding strategy. You know, you can have a great game idea, but if no one knows about it, who's going to care? When it comes to funding, most devs focus on the pitch deck, but often ignore what matters just as much: how they're building traction with their marketing. So, in this episode, we're going to explore how early stage marketing builds confidence, community, and momentum that makes funding more attainable. From signaling traction to reducing risk for investors, we'll break down how visibility equals viability when it comes to your funding strategy. So, that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey, everybody, and we're back. And today with us, I have Oscar Clark. Oscar, how is it going? And thank you so much for being on the show.
No, pleasure. It's good. It's going well. We're in interesting times, as I think anyone who's been involved in the game industry for the last few years will know. However, I'm definitely getting a sense that things are looking up, and I'm particularly looking forward to Gamescom.
Yes, Gamescom is approaching us, at least at the time of this recording. I believe by the time this goes live, it will already be in full swing, potentially. But anyways, yeah, it is approaching or here, or it has come, depending on when you're listening to this.
Depending on the temporal time zone and
all those factors. But, folks, for those of you who aren't familiar with Oscar Clark, he is the CEO of Fundamentally Games Limited, also the director of Game Advance Academy, and you're the director of what I understand is a new startup called Arcanix.ai. I would love to hear a little bit more about these things.
Let me I'll paint a picture. So I'm basically old, and I've been involved in games since 1998. In fact, actually, if I really think about it, I've made my first game pitch in 1987. Was told, come back later, great idea. When you've made it, it'll be great. But of course, had no money, had to start again. So it took me 10 years to get into games. I ran an online gaming service called Wireplay back in the day, where there was a thing called a dial-up modem, which half of the audience won't even know what that is.
I
just put it this way. We helped with the early sort of stage of Counter-Strike, and the Counter-Strike guys ran out of money. I bought them some new computers, so it's all down to me. Okay, that's a joke, it's silliness, but I'm old enough to have had the early kind of little bits like that to play with. Probably the more interesting one, apart from the fact that I kind of was one of the earliest people in mobile games back in the day, where we used Java and there was no money, and we were always told there would never be any future in mobile games. And people like this little guy called Ilkka Paninen, no one's ever heard of. Oh, wait, he's the guy that set up Supercell. People like him were selling me games back in the day. So I'm very lucky I got to know a lot of the people who are now kind of the giants of the industry from those kind of early era. Anyone who remembers PlayStation 3 might remember there was a thing called PlayStation Home, a virtual world, and I was home architect on that. But any game devs out there who have looked out for a guy in a small top hat will probably have seen me at some game show hosting or emceeing. And for 5.5 years, I was a Unity evangelist as well. So I've been there, done it, got the T-shirt. Fundamentally Games was our effort to do publishing, but what the new venture is, Arcanix. Basically, I wrote a book about 10 years ago called Games as a Service, and basically Arcanix is us building some tech around how to make the strategic decisions around your live ops. But I won't bore you with the details of that. I'm just a big believer that we're building fan-based experiences, not just building games anymore. And if you're going to build a fan-based experience, you've got to care what the players want. Absolutely. Not just today, not just tomorrow, but you got to keep caring about it. And how do you know what are the things that players are actually responding to? And that's the bits that we're trying to help build.
Yeah, no, and that's so good to hear. And I mean, I know a lot of us listening are, obviously totally on board with that, but still, it's like, we see it, folks. We see little pockets in the industry, or even big ones, where it doesn't seem like it's as centered and focused as it needs to be, right? So it's always great to have these conversations.
Well, even then, I think, today I was reading an article in Games Industry Biz talking about the death of live ops, when it's the complete opposite. Now, don't get me wrong, I think there's some genuine challenges out there. We know there's been bad actors, and we know that one of the results of there being too much content is a lot of players are getting kind of like put off. The tyranny of choice.
Yeah.
No wonder there's so many people going back to retro games. There's no wonder people are getting stuck in one or two games and not trying all that enormous range of content. We are not without problems in the space. Don't get me wrong. But my point is caring about what players play, and not just about today, but on the longer run, that's going to be critical for anyone trying to make games today.
Yeah. I'm going to digress for a moment, only because it's top of mind here. But what you just said there in terms of like so much content, right? It's everywhere. Like there's too much content, not just in games, like not just like what game do I play or what type of information do I consume to make a game. And what I'm going to share in a moment is there's a book I just finished. There's a entrepreneurial podcast of someone I probably mentioned before on the show before, Pat Flynn, and he had a book that was just released. I just finished it. I think 2 days ago, and it's called Lean Learning. And the whole core principle is just about learning information at that right moment in time, instead of trying to think that you need to learn everything, because it's like this cultural, I would say even like a world belief that you always have to know so much, but yet we take all this in and do nothing with it. Same problem with all the libraries we have with our games, right? We have all these like games in our libraries, but how much of those games are we actually playing? Same with Netflix,
I like the principle. For me, though, I know my personality type. I am the voracious learner. I am the thing I love. The reason why I do podcasts is because I can't get enough. I want to constantly question my perception, my kind of focus, my framing of the way. I mean, I'm very game development obsessed, but I want to change my framing. I want to make sure my framing is still correct and up to date. One of the reasons I love going out there and hosting a conference isn't because I just love the sound of my own voice. Obviously I do, but it's also because if I sit there and I'm having an argument with one of the leading lights in development, I'm learning and I'm holding them to account, but I'm also challenging my assumptions at the same time as getting them to reinforce what they know. And the fact that one of the delights of the games industry for me is that we are so much more open and so much more willing to share than a lot of other industries I've been aware of.
Yep.
And I think that's something I absolutely adore.
Well, speaking of willing to share, and in light of me even just calling out and mentioning that book, I mean, you're working on a book right now too, correct?
Yeah. So I just submitted. I've got a few little bits to chuck in, like the cover art, and I've just finished doing all of the image mapping in the book. So yeah, I've just written a book on game economy design. Importantly, I have a feeling that we haven't really taught game design as its own art craft. I can't think of the right phrase for it. I don't think we treat game designers as seriously as its own entity as it deserves, particularly in education. But it's especially the case with commercial game design. And I don't just mean how you get money. I mean the whole idea of how you do balance, how power curves operate, how you retain users, how you build layers of communicating ideas and emotions. And yes, money is going to be part of that because we are a commercial industry at the end of the day. And how do we hope to have people create authentically genuine, good game experiences where they don't know how to do authentically good, positive monetization models as well? So I wrote this book. It's all about playing with balance, about understanding, the economics. There's an economic side to how games work. And I don't mean not the money. How do you balance resources? How do you deal with scarcity? And there's a whole sector of learning around that called economics.
Yeah.
So why don't we learn from economics? And I know there are some people who do that. I'm not trying to say I'm inventing the wheel, but I've taken some economics, some psychology, some effectively genuine base level marketing training, like pricing. Pricing is a discipline, but do you have people in games talking about pricing strategy in the same way as you might have with people who work at Coca-Cola?
Yeah, it's a very great point.
So yeah, that's what I've written. It's going to be part of Routledge, so Taylor and Francis, hopefully out end of the year, but probably maybe slightly a bit later because I'm taking far too long. The delight of that thing, though, I mean, I'm not here to pitch that particularly, but the delight of that is I got to talk to some amazing other game economy designers who don't all agree with me on everything. And isn't that part of the joy? Where I can sit and I can talk to Tad Kelly, who's a good friend of mine, and he and I were talking in detail about his approach, about how he looks for the possibility space, and I'm talking about my 3 loops, different models, all trying to achieve the same principle about how we take players into this kind of creative journey inside our gaming worlds.
Yeah, absolutely. It really comes down to those, different perspectives, essentially, which folks, for those of you who've been, listening for any length of time, know that that's what we're about here too. And I think that's what we should all be about, because it's through those perspectives that can really bring out some of the really, creative energy that we see in this space, in this industry. So, really,
it's kind of why I spent so much time working with indie teams. And I spent too much time. I've kind of ruined my history, background, blah, 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 because I indulged myself. After Unity, I got the chance to spend much more time with indie communities. But don't worry, I still get hired by some of the biggest teams in the world to teach them how to do monetization. So it's not too terrible. But I get to talk to people with different identities, different cultures, different backgrounds, different stories. And I find that the best experiences come when you have people who don't look like you in the room.
Oh, yeah. Well, talking about different experiences and stories, well, first, really appreciate you sharing all that with us. But now we want to get to know you a little bit more. By having you go through the Q box. And folks, for those of you who aren't familiar, the Q box is just a few random questions I prepared here today for our Oscar. So, Oscar, are you ready for the Q box round?
I'm ready for the Q box.
Excellent. No. I have yet to have
the Q box.
have a contest who can go lower. At any rate. All right. First is, what's your biggest gaming pet peeve?
My biggest pet peeve is pressing X to continue. It so annoys me. So Watchdog, Final Fantasy 14, when it first came out, I think you spend about 15 minutes pressing X with no actual value other than the next screen. What are we doing here? It would be a game, not a choose. It's not even choose your own adventure. You're just going to the next. There's just lazy writing. Sorry.
It's all right. It's all right.
Genuine. And the thing is, I was taught very, very early on about web design. I did some of the very earliest UX design on mobile devices, and you lose half your audience after every click. I know it's not quite true, but over the average, over a period of time. Now we're trying to engage users. Now most of the games I'm trying to do are going to be kind of like free to play kind of stuff. You're just burning users.
Yeah. But it's interesting. No, not to go on a tangent here, but I've seen over time too that what you called out to by pressing X is actually treating a generation of players in which are missing a lot of information because they just want to push right through it or whatever. And then on the flip side,
we don't read it. We just press X and get on.
And it's and then we as developers have to think of, all right, we got to think of other systems or things we have to incorporate because no one's reading the stupid text and now they don't know what to do. And people are saying there's a problem here when it's not.
But, exactly that. Exactly.
Yeah, I've seen that.
And there's nice ways of fixing it, and Nintendo showed us how to do it. Yeah. If you introduce an idea to someone, you get them to master it, and then you challenge them on it, so they have to do it in anger.
Yep. So, at any rate,
rant over.
All right. Next is, what's one habit you have that has contributed to your success?
I did and ahh about this one, but data, basically. I am a data philiac. What that means is asking the question about why anyone should care, but using data to provide that answer. Because at the end of the day, unless I can get actual data, as opposed to anecdote, as opposed to opinion, everything I'm doing is nonsense. So test as early as possible, get some data, but don't just leave it there. Data just tells you what has happened. It's not going to tell you what will happen. And that's why insight, design, expertise will always matter. No matter how good AI gets, it is going to revert to the mean. It is not going to allow the kind of creative energy and exercise that an expert who understands something fully could then apply to the data.
Yeah, great point. And third and last but not least, and the staple here on the show is, what game are you playing now?
Well, the thing is, you've just come at the point where I've just finished Atomfall. Atomfall hit literally last night. I just finished it. And, a great game. I very much recommend it to people. Rebellion team did a fantastic job. It's frustrating, as every game is in certain areas, but in general, amazing. I thoroughly recommend it. But I have to admit, I have a terrible habit of going back to Slay the Spire continuously. And I want Downfall, the mod version, to be on my console, because I can only play the mod version on my Steam Deck or PC, and I haven't got my PC set up for my TV downstairs, so I just end up playing the same old Slay the Spire.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with that, especially if you're having fun.
But it's like, this is a game that should be live ops and isn't. And as a live ops guy, it's so annoying.
Point taken, and good one at that. So, well, really appreciate you sharing a little bit more about yourself, Oscar. But now that we have gone through
my emotions.
Yes. But now that we have gone through the Q box round, we're going to get into today's discussion, which is, why marketing is your first funding strategy, which I'm really excited to, have this conversation. I'm sure a lot of you listening today are as well. And, to kind of kick things off, I'm curious, why do you think that most indie teams, underestimate the role of marketing in the funding process? Because they're so different.
Yeah. So I will start with this, because I am a trained marketeer. I have a diploma in marketing. Technically, I'm a member of the Chartered Institute of Marketing. So I'm actually supposed to know what I'm talking about. Whether I do or not, you can be the judge of later. But do you know what the first lesson I had was as a marketing student? It was, marketing is about identifying and satisfying consumer needs. Now, it's not pretty pictures with a message on, buy this. That's not what it is. It's about a fundamental mindset that is audience-centric. Now, if you're going to raise funding and you can't demonstrate that you understand that there is an audience that wants this thing and that you have a route to market to that audience, how on earth is any funder going to care what you can do?
Right.
So, and don't get me wrong, that does not allow us to escape from the whole principle about what the game is. But again, I'm going to come back to marketing. If we are treating marketing as a holistic thing, not just, like pretty pictures, then you have to realize that when you're thinking about what game you're making, you're thinking about an audience and the experience and emotions you want to deliver them. You may have a narrative element to that, a contextual world. You may have an art style related to that. But if you can't answer the question, why should the player care? It is pointless. And that is the fundamental marketing question, because it applies to your product. So the first of the 4 Ps is product. What is a game if it's not a product? So how we define and design should be driven by product thinking, i.e., why should someone care and how do I make it efficiently, effectively? The second P is pricing. So that doesn't just mean stick £5 price tag on it. It means, what is the exchange of value and where does that exchange of value happen?
Yeah.
So, it might be, a subscription. It might be a microtransaction. It might be an ad. There's nothing wrong with that. It might be in-app kind of sponsorship by Red Bull. I mean, the original one for that, I think, was Zool with Chupa Chups back in the 80s, I think. 84 or something. I don't know. Somebody will correct me on that one. So there are different ways. And so the way I try to teach that in the book in particular, but generally, is don't think about marketing as a single piece. Marketing is about strategy and delivery. The strategy part means we have to think about the why of what we're trying to do. And if we're going to raise money from a funder, they need us to see that we have, first off, a clear, targetable audience, that we understand what that audience wants, that we know how our game absolutely delivers on that value, but more importantly, that we can then communicate it. And how do we communicate it? Well, we do things early, we test. I'm a massive fan of basically the hyper casual technique. Now, I'm not saying do hyper casual games at all, but there's a hyper casual technique, which was you don't build the game, you build the trailer. And you build more than one trailer. And what can we do with that? Oh, do you remember I talked about data being an important habit? I can put out a trailer, 30-second trailer, and I can spend 100 quid. Nothing more, maybe 150 quid on an ad. 3 days, £50 a day. Is that going to give me statistically significant information? No, it is not. But if I do 4 ads, so 2 game types with 2 alternate art types that have been delivered in the game jam style, and we just built the trailer bits, and that's come from already having come up with 100 different ideas, which I've already manually whittled down to the things that satisfy that audience that I think is going to satisfy that audience. Let's get some proof. Let's put that as an ad, and guess what happens? You get a cost per click. So I immediately know if it's even worth bothering with that idea. Next stage was a day one. And then if I got day one retention, cost per install, cost per click, I could even go and do one of these, like, I call it NPS tests, so Net Promoter Score tests. But basically, I'm talking about people like Playtest Cloud or Antidote. So if you're doing mobile, you'd use Playtest Cloud and you put it on Android because Android's friction free. If you're doing PC, you'd probably use Itch or something like that. You could do early access on Steam, but I wouldn't. I'd probably do Itch because you don't want to burn your Steam time, because it's more than a year of early access. You probably killed your audience.
And there's other factors at play too. Yeah,
exactly. But imagine we find these nice, easy vectors. We're not doing the full game yet. All we're doing is we're making sure that our ideas aren't stupid. Why does that matter? Because if I can then go in with my pitch to my investor and say, look, these are my data points. I'm not guessing anymore. They don't have to guess anymore. And if you do it right and you do it smart, you start communicating with an audience. You start building an audience around that. Now, what we're doing is we're building a fan base to get interested in what we're doing as a studio. And we're experimenting, we're showing them, and we do it openly. We don't lie. We don't do fake ads. I'm not talking about doing fake ads here. I mean, don't get me wrong. There is a place for a fake ad. I don't want to kind of over-egg that. It's not always necessarily a bad thing. I'm not advocating the bait and switch, though. I think you probably all know the bait and switch, where you put an ad out for a thing that looks like your game, but it's not actually in your game. That's not what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Because I mean that just comes down to misalignment and you're disobeying trust, basically, if you're doing
that. Exactly. Trust is all.
Yeah.
Trust is all. And what is marketing? Marketing is about building a brand. What is a brand? By definition, it is a mark of trust.
Yeah. Yep.
And we focus so hard on performance advertising because it's so useful, but especially if we're using it to get data like I'm describing for this process. But actually what we've done is we've undervalued the brand building. And it doesn't matter if at the era where we could just chuck money at audience and get audience guaranteed, I can see why that wasn't necessary. I don't think that exists anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe if you're a Scopely, maybe if you're an EA and you have vast pockets, then you could build a good enough game and get a big audience by just throwing cash at it.
Yeah. You bring up some really cool points from this. I mean, well, one, I love that you called out strategy in terms of equating that to the why. Because I think what happens a lot of times, we think of strategy in the terms of how. And the how is more associated with the plan. You still need a plan.
That's the doing.
Yeah, that's the doing. But if without the idea and focus of the why behind these things, then it's like we're leading forward with the how without understanding, hey, what is that right intent and everything else. Yeah. And then the other thing you brought up, I thought this is really, really cool when you're like, hey, start making a trailer. Like people are like, wait, probably thinking, what do you mean start making a trailer? And as you're saying, like start making a trailer and maybe just promote that, run that. Because we were talking pre-show or maybe even mention, I might get probably pre-show and before and even earlier, I mentioned about, Pat Flynn. He's like in the entrepreneurial space of podcasting, folks. I've listened to a lot of other people in that space too. That's why I got interested in podcasting, from listening to other podcasts. And what was really cool in those spaces, you had a lot of people in the entrepreneur space that were saying, hey, go out. Yeah, if you want to make a course, great. But don't build the course and then start promoting it, because what could happen is crickets, nothing. And why don't you lead with this idea and concept of something, pitch it, sell it, whatever, get people on board. And then if they're not on board, all you did was waste the time and energy, not waste, you still learned, but you spent that time and energy building a landing page that did or didn't collect information, opposed to building a whole product out of it. And so when you were saying that idea about like a trailer or any other things, I'm like, I don't know why I don't think of this more often, but that could totally be an extremely viable way. Because that way it's like, hey, guess what? We spent 2 months of time, crash and burn, but guess what? What do we spend? We spent very little. We learned quite a bit, and now we have a better idea on how to reposition, restructure this. So our runway that we have, or whatever resources and stuff, haven't been like, we're not burnt out. We're excited that we learned.
You haven't burnt it.
Yeah.
Exactly. And this is why when Hypercasual started, it was very exciting. But unfortunately, what happened is they stopped at that point. I mean, don't get me wrong. So Voodoo exists, Homer exists. There are teams out there that did a fantastic job of that. But there was an awful lot of poop that also went out. But I think there's also an opportunity missed, because I think the next stage, again, like you said, why would you spend all of your money to just find out if the thing you're building is any good?
Yeah.
You look at something like, and again, I'm not using this as an equation, but, there are large games that have just crashed and burned, Concord and various other things like that. Now, could that have been done differently? I don't know. I don't know the fundamental causes. I suspect a lot of it was down to them not understanding how to do live ops, but that's me. I've got my biases. But if you think about this, if we can think about a different way of doing development, rather than the old school way of you did a vertical slice, you pitch that to a publisher, you then go and build a game as an alpha beta release. What that is focused on is the functionality, not the player.
Yeah.
If you build your game development strategy around KPIs, then you've actually got to make it work for the player. You can't have any excuse. If you say, I'm going to hit this KPI, I've got to get this level of day 1 retention, I'm going to get this level of day 7 retention, I'm going to get this level of day 30 retention. If that's how you divide up your milestones, then it doesn't matter what goes into it. All that matters is what's effective. And those KPIs are ideally targeted for why players care. And that, to me, is a massive mental shift about concept development. It's not easy, by the way. One of the troubles of that we discovered, we got burned by this. We lost 3 studios who ran out of money, basically because of this historic era. We were trying to do publishing for that. We had a whole bunch of problems. The biggest issue, I would argue, is the speed in which you have to respond to new information.
Okay.
Because you can spend way too much money trying to fix a problem rather than to make a quick fix, test it, refix, test it. Because the thing you want to do is kill the game as early as possible. By the way, investors don't want to hear you say that.
Yeah.
And I don't actually necessarily mean kill your darlings, although we all know that is a thing we should do. What I mean is stop digging if it's not working. So if I can do it quickly, if I can say, right, I'm going to make a game. I'm going to make a live ops experience, for example. I've got to make sure that my core loop, my start, condition, challenge, resolution, reward, the thing that players do to play the game, that has to be beautiful, delightful, charming, amazing. How do I know it is? Well, I build it, I test it, they stay playing. Can I get them playing for 2-3 days? Well, if I got that right, my core loop's pretty good. But I then got to build the context loop. So what I call the context loop, a lot of people call meta. This is where I get very, very silly because I don't like people using meta to describe this. The reason is meta, it means something. Meta is a word to describe things which are not the game. So I call it context loop because it's about purpose, progression, it's about optimization and narrative. Those things, which I use as a loop, I'm not going to bore you on the podcast. You can read the book when it comes out. But the reason I look at those things is because I can look at the emotional journey of a player in the same way I look at the emotional journey of the player when they're doing the task, the start, condition, challenge, resolution, reward. I can use these same vectors, models to think about why people are going to care. But it's like having a second hand, a minute hand, and the cultural, which I'll talk about in a bit, is the hour hand. So basically it's different rhythms to do different levels of sustaining the audience. So if we have our development process, we start with the things that are fast and rapid, like the hyper casual game. We then build the layers that keep you playing and keep you retained. And then finally we build the cultural, the social connections around the game. That's how you build the games that can last the 20 years.
You know, I love this like process of going about things. And, you know, just to go back real quick, when you mentioned like kill the game, I mean, I look at this as no different than like if you're hiring a bunch of play testers or whatever, right? I mean, what are you trying to do? You're trying to break the game, find the areas and things like that, right? Yeah. But in this, it's a same mentality almost. It's just because think about it. If you're trying to kill the game in the most sincere way possible, it's going to help. It's going to help you learn faster, learn what to do. And because the mentality shifts, like you said, from, okay, let's try to fix it. And then it becomes like this, let's say this like sinkhole, this quicksand that you keep throwing sand in or something to plug it up, but it's not going to. And if it does, just think of all the effort like that is used to do that. And then you are killing the game by doing things that way.
And science works because we create a hypothesis and we try to disprove it.
Right.
And that's why it works. If we try to fudge it, we end up with woo, we end up with nonsense, and we end up with breaking things. If we try to break our assumptions, we have the biggest chance of making something. Now, why am I doing it this way? And we started out with a conversation about why is marketing so important for your first fundraise. So what I'm trying to show you is it's not just a moment in time. It's an attitude, it's a mindset to build a pipeline that doesn't just serve the kind of fundraise, but it serves your development process. It's about thinking about ways you can start to create exposure and interest and audience. It's about being able to build fan bases. And those layers are why they're so important to your fundraise, because they build credibility, they show sensibility, they show a level of understanding, they show data insight. All of which feeds into getting rid of all of the stuff that we end up doing because we're excited about our project. And the thing about that is that getting an angel investor or a VC or one of those or other groups interested in your game, they don't have your emotional connection with the idea.
Right.
So you've got to be able to disavow yourself of your own assumptions to be able to nail why your game is the one that's going to be there. Now, don't get me wrong. We are in a hit business. We make the most ridiculous thing, the most complicated, interdependent, multiple skill set experience imaginable. And at the end of the day, we can't guarantee anyone buying into it because it's subjective.
Yeah. Absolutely.
We are crazy. The fact that anyone makes a successful game is insane. And so knowing that we've got to pitch insanity to investors, and our job is to remove as many layers of insanity as possible so they can have confidence that we will have the right thing, that we're able to adjust quickly, pivot, change, adapt, improve based on data.
Yeah. I love how you're talking about it, because the way I would distill that is essentially we're removing the subjective, or we should be, because by doing that allows us to look at those things like, KPIs, things that can help reduce whether it's potential or actual risk that, publishers or VCs or other investors that are looking to do. And it's tough because, like you said, none of this is easy. It can be simple, but it's still a challenge because we are, we have our own biases. We are going to be very subjective. So it's like, how can you remove that subjective? And that's why the things like, kill the game is probably one way to get you into that mindset to go from more of an objective way of thinking, which is funny because if we think about it, I would say most developers out there do look at themselves as being very logical and objective based, and definitely are. But then when it's your darling, there's still going to be that emotional attachment, and that's when the two worlds kind of collide a bit.
I remember Tim Schafer at 1GDC, I think it was, saying, "When is a game done? It's done when it leaves my cold, dead hand."
Yeah.
Which is a great line, and I kind of get it. But actually, I think it's wrong for most of us. I think most of us need to do the opposite. We need to kill it before it consumes us.
Yeah. Yeah. And or at least part or let go or some form of that. And it's funny you say that because because as you were saying it reminded me when I was in college once. We had this author come in, I forget what course or whatever, but she was reading a book, and as she was reading it, she was actually with a pencil like quickly making edits on the fly. Even while she had already published book, she was still doing it. She's like, this is just something I do. And I trying to let go. And at least this is a way of me maybe processing that need to let go of that. But it's so interesting to see that it's, it's ongoing.
And we had the live ops equivalent of that, by the way, is ship it.
Yeah. Yep.
I know it sounds like they're at odds, but they're kind of not. Because one of the issues that we have with live games, you think about the way we build games in layers until we get it ready to release. But you can't do that with live games because your Halloween's not shifting. We've got to actually work in the opposite way with live games, where we've got to think about how much time do we have before we have to push it out, and then what can we fit into that. And I think actually the reason why I mention it is I think it's an important way to think, even if you're making a narrative-based game, is because you as a studio don't have forever.
Right.
You've got a run rate.
Yeah.
You've got to ship
No one has
it.
forever, by the way, regardless of how much money you have.
Yeah, exactly. So how do you create the discipline? I think in some ways I'm kind of going against the whole agile thing now. I mean, I'm being a bit flippant, to be fair. I don't actually mean it, but if you think of it, we're actually developing the wrong way. We should be developing with our time frame going backwards, not forwards.
Yeah,
because we should be building the smallest thing that fits and then adding to it in consistent, sustainable ways that works for what a player actively wants, because we're not building gold discs that get sold in shops anymore. We're building fan experiences.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what? And while you're saying that too, this is something I've done with some clients of mine too, where it's almost like having a, this like, I don't know, this different style of roadmap where as you're going down that path being like, if this happens, then do this or this, right? You come to a crossroads essentially, or a fork in the road. And if you keep having to go back essentially to correct it before you can, because that's like a block. It's like you can't move forward until you've checked this box. And if you're continuing not being able to check that box, then it becomes maybe a hard discussion that you have with yourself or your team. It was like, do we continue? Because we're keep failing at this point. We're looking for ways to address it and how, but if we can't get past this point, we need to think of something else, either a big pivot or a complete change.
But the joy is when you get the pivot. I mean,
Yeah.
a number of amazing products, amazing games have happened because of those pivots.
Yeah.
And I know I don't know the history of how Portal coming on, but I think Portal is, for me, one of the most interesting creative ideas. For me, looking at Portal, it's a first-person shooter where someone says, okay, no, you can't have shooting people.
Yeah.
You got to make everything to do with the first-person shooter, but you can't shoot people.
Right.
Isn't that amazing? That kind of constraint?
Yes. Yes.
And if you apply that logic to what you're making and making your game, that's really interesting. Now, back to the marketing. Let's not forget we started this in a marketing thread. So what is marketing? Well, we talked about it being strategy, but it's also identity. You know, brand we've talked about, trust we've talked about. Now, I think if again go back to that idea that we're building fan experiences, we're not just building games anymore. And I'm sorry about those people who want to go to make games. There's a little part of my soul that just wants to make games, particularly board games. But I'm realizing that's not what the market is. The market is people who fall in love with your identity as a game maker as much as it is the game. And well, that's not quite true. We often overemphasize how much people care about the developer. But there's something about authenticity of the developer which magnifies the authenticity of the game. And so that's why when I'm saying don't fake things, I'm talking about being open about the fact that I put out a test trailer to see if anyone's interested. I'm open with that's the process that I'm doing. You know, I'm not going to tell you at the point where you first see the trailer that that's a fake thing. I'm going to say, go to that thing, go to that page. That page says, thank you so much. We've just been testing out this game idea. Really appreciate you clicking on this.
Yeah.
By the way, do you want to find out more about what we're doing? Go sign up to this. Those types of mindsets means you make it a conversation.
Right. Yeah. It's like a continuation of not just the trust that we mentioned earlier about, you know, with brands and fans and things along that line, but it's also about looking at players in a different way where it's not just transactional. It's also about building relationships. And
absolutely.
And we never look at it that way as much. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We want to care about as much about the fact that we want to make great games as the great games we make.
Right. And it's funny too. Like I always have a problem with the phrase, just make a great game. Right. And we look at it this way too.
It's like, just get good.
Yeah. Just get good. Like really good. Yeah. What does that mean? Just do it. Yeah. But I mean, part of, I think it's like how we view game. Like, so I have my own like terminology for this as it relates to a lot of the work I do. And it's like, you know, surpass existing value while catering to a specific audience. But I think another way that you opened up just now is when we talk about great, like what else can that mean? And one is establishing like relationships with players in a way that's like meaningful to them. It's like, yes, they want a game that's fun, has that core gameplay loop and ultimately is fun. But like how much more of an experience is it for them that when they're done with the game, they're still thinking about you because of how authentic you are, how it makes them feel, how it relates to their identity. Like there's so many other factors going on that we don't think about.
And I'll chuck something in on that. So my cultural loop consists of lifestyle fit, cooperation, competition, and what I call zeitgeist. Now, why has it got those four things? Because lifestyle fit means is if you're, for example, you're using a mobile phone to play a game, that has a profound impact on the kind of experience you're going to be wanting at that point. I'm waiting for a bus. I'm expecting a phone call. I might be bored. I'm probably sitting on the toilet.
Yep.
Directly affects the way I play. Now, let's say it's a Steam game, but it doesn't do Steam Deck. Okay, that means I'm going to go to my place where I have my PC set up. If I'm a PC gamer, it's probably going to be some sort of like, den of some kind that I am escaping the rest of my family over. Now, if it's a console, it's probably going to be in the front room or maybe in a bedroom, but it's not unlikely to be in a front room where you're probably taking over the dominant screen.
Yeah, the family room. Yeah, exactly. That dominant screen, everybody's screen.
Each of these mindsets affects the kinds of games we want to play. And if we ignore the physical context we're in, the needs that that person has, how are people going to continually engage with that game?
Yeah, exactly.
So then you think about, well, what is the collaborative part of it? It might just be there's a website with some nice hints and tips on. It might be a fandom page, but probably we want something where we feel we're participating and we get visibility that there are other people who care about this game. And it might be directly gameplay, but it might be any number of things. It might be, social channels. It might be bitching about a character. It might be saying how much we're in love with, some NPC or some creature. But thinking about the collaborative vector of your game actually matters. And I find it really baffling how many game developers ignore the social layer, or they just revert to competition. Nothing wrong with competition, but competition is not leaderboards.
Yeah.
Leaderboards, the top 100 players care about leaderboards. The rest of the 3 million people, if you're lucky, playing the game, aren't going to get in the top 100. So why should they care about a leaderboard?
Yeah.
So competition is more fundamental than that. It's about me feeling competent. It's about me feeling that I can beat my mates. It's got to be personal for competition to matter, or it has to be aspirational. I want to be the guy that's going to be the next one on stage at the LOL Open Invitational.
Right.
So knowing whether I actually can be that person or whether I'm playing so I can vicariously live through that person, that's still competition.
Yeah.
But then my last one, the zeitgeist one, I think it's become so critical in the last 10 years. And that is, why would anyone watch someone else play your game? How many developers even bother thinking about that? And yet, I would argue no PC game and few mobile games can get an audience if they haven't solved that problem.
Yeah. It's so true.
So that's why I think it's important to look at your game as a marketeer, in the sense that I am, as in I'm a designer, but I'm a designer because it's my passion. I was a trained marketeer, and I've turned out to be really useful because I learned some economics and some psychology and learned how to apply it to an audience and do all the research to know if there's a market. All of that stuff is incredibly, incredibly, incredibly useful. But the history we have in games of marketing people is they're the people in the publisher who we don't talk to until the game's finished.
Yeah.
Which is a freaking disaster. Because what happens is the game developers blame the marketing people for not selling the game properly. The marketing people go, what the hell do you expect? You just made the thing you wanted to do and didn't bother caring about what an audience wanted. Anyway, I'm being a bit evocative, but that's the fundamental principle. Marketing-led organizations in games are actually player-led organizations, but we've just professionalized it.
Yeah. It's, so many good things here. And, I know we're coming on time here, but I do want to take a moment to kind of go back, because I'm sure some of us today are thinking, wait a minute. We're just talking a lot about like really important things, but how do we still like apply this back to like, how does any of this really mean like a funding strategy for funding, right? So let's take that back and try to apply it like just some of the let's say key high level points, because and kind of like complete that loop, because I know some people, we might have lost some people, and if we did, I'm sorry, but we'll get there, don't worry.
We're very info dense. Oh, I know I am. So let's go back to what we said at the beginning. If you think about it, we said get data. Get data fast. Why? Because we need to know we're making the right thing.
Yep.
We need to know that the player is going to care. Why do we need to know that? Because if we're going to get funding and we don't know the answer to that, we ain't getting funding.
Right, because they want to know.
Exactly. Now, don't get me wrong. There are a lot of grant opportunities, and anyone out there who isn't exploring grant opportunities, particularly in the UK, but also outside it, Belgium, France, whatever, US, especially Canada,
Mm-hmm.
there are grants out there for prototypes, for product development, so on and so forth. But they're never enough.
Yeah.
They're just a way to get started. What you want to is get as much of that as you can and use that to get the proof.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm talking about. And that's marketing. It doesn't sound like it, but it's actually marketing because it's getting data. It's about building and building as much of an audience as you can vicariously, ideally without having to spend lots of money, by being vocal, active, engaging, open, honest, all the usual stuff that goes with being visible. Do that as well. So if you can build an audience, however small, but build some credible people who care about what you're doing, prove that the thing that you're making will solve the playing needs of that audience, you've already halfway through the battle. You can then frame that in your pitch to those investors. You can demonstrate your credibility. There are other factors. Team is probably 80% of why an investor decides to invest in you. It's going to be down to team. But unless you know what you're building and why your team are the ones who are necessary to build that, why would the investor trust you? And again, we have to have got the data.
Yeah.
We've got to prove it with an audience. We've got to demonstrate there's a market fit. We've got to demonstrate that we understand what games are out there. And in a space where last year, more than 15,000 Steam games, something like 80,000 mobile games or something ridiculous. I mean, I've forgotten the numbers, but it's an enormous proportion of games out there, more than anyone could play in reality. And you expect them to play this new game you're making. So you need to know why yours will stand out, why yours will get found. And it won't get found if you haven't worked out why players care and how you can find them.
Yeah.
Both of which are marketing.
Yeah, absolutely. And so well said, because again, these are all the components that we're ultimately looking for. I mean, let's face it, when you hear, whether it was other conversations on here, with publishers or people who work directly with publishers or any other space, I think now you can start seeing how what Oscar just broke down is not really much different than what any publisher, any investor is going to break down in terms of this is what we're looking for and here's why, right? There'll be some more nuanced pieces of information as it relates to different people and stakeholders and everything else like that. But ultimately, it's coming down to the same thing. Like, why does the community matter? What kind of stats, information, data do you have to show that things are going in the right way? And I think this is why I also called out earlier and love what Oscar was sharing before about, hey, just take, minimal, like viable proof of concept essentially and create a trailer or anything else that puts it out there to validate like, why people are liking this or just rallying behind. Because when you get that information, like think about it this way. If you have like next to nothing that you've built, but you started and you give this impression that there's a lot more behind it and because of the following, and you go to, pitch to a publisher, and when they ask, where's development? It's like, actually, we're still prototyping. And they might just do a double take. Wait, what? You're just prototyping, but yet you have these numbers you can share with us right now? What partner wouldn't want to like at least entertain a few other conversations to kind of feel this out, to be like, wait, are they telling us the truth here? Like, what's going on here? This is awesome, but we want to. That puts you in a very good position. And sometimes when you hear those conversations going on in all these different spaces, like, wait a minute, it sounds like these folks just started, but yet they're having all this traction. Why? There's a good chance that might be the why.
Exactly that.
Awesome. Well, again, as I said, we're definitely coming on time. We talked about a lot, and now that we have full circle here, let's close with some like tips, suggestions, or anything that you would recommend to our listeners based on what we talked about today, Oscar, if you could.
I'm going to do that boring thing, data. And I know it's stupid, but they're the three things. I mean, it's the same thing, but it matters so much. The biggest problem we have is that if you're an indie, getting access to market data is next to impossible. I worked out how much it would cost for me to get Game Refinery's market data in a form where I'd be able to do reasonable forecasts, and it was about £40,000. I could hire someone to make a game for that.
Yep.
I mean, not pay them as well as they deserve, but that's a different subject. But it's still what. And again, that's not me having dissing Game Refinery. They've got great stuff, and I understand why they charge for that. But the point is that model of market intelligence is biased to the most profitable organizations on the planet for games.
Yeah,
of course it is. This is a commercial process, so we can't just pull out from a hat the data we need to know what we're going on. You can get some great stuff from Steam Spy. Steam Data Suite does some really good stuff for attribution pieces. Again, there's so many different types of data. Attribution, as I mentioned, gameplay data, market data, even game behavioral data, sentiment analysis, so much stuff that we can get. But it's very hard for a small indie to be able to get market information, not least because it's commercially sensitive. So for me, it's about let's use the tools we can. Let's find ways to do it cheaply. But think about how many tests you're going to have to do to find the magic game.
Yeah.
And it's, and like I said, my model is pull out 100 ideas on paper, work out which 10 to paper prototype. From the 10 you paper prototype, what's the 2 that you're going to turn into an actual trailer and do 2 art variants using free asset store stuff to test that. And if they hit less than 20 cents cost per click, or maybe 30 cents cost per click, then sure, that's probably worth pursuing. But maybe we're going to have to do that round 3-4 times, and then we find the game that's got the lowest cost per click, and then we build that out. We build a 20-minute version of playing the game, just enough to get a day one retention. Then I can get that out, stick it onto a site, see if I can get an audience for it. And if it doesn't work, then I go back to another one.
Yeah.
And do that again, and do that again. Eventually, hopefully, I get to the stage where I find something that hits and that has that thing. But the problem is, it's got to be fast. And we've got to think systematically. It's all about data. It's all about making sure that we don't just say what we think. We get some proof for it. And that, to me, is how we get to be authentic as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And one side comment there, I believe, and Oscar, correct me if I'm wrong, the reason why you keep calling out to paid ads, essentially cost per click and stuff, because you're going to learn way faster doing that than if you're trying to, post it on social media. You can still do that by all means, but it's going to be much, much faster.
It's because it's a Occam's razor.
Yeah.
The reason, if you go through a social post to get that data, you're going to bias it towards people who are going to follow you.
Yes. Yep. Exactly.
So this is purely down to I love the social thing, love to go to PAX and all that kind of stuff and show off your game. That's great stuff, but you're not getting unfiltered information.
Yeah.
It's it's useful. You get some insight, but you're going to bias the audience by your very presence. You need them to not know or care where the ad came from, where the promotion came from. And that's why paid ad mechanisms are significantly more useful for data capture.
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting that you will end up doing paid UA as a process, especially if an indie developer. You may only use it for the research part. But the point is, it's the Occam razor. They have no bias towards you. They are randomly sent to you within the framing of the targeting data you've set up. Let's say I want League of Legends players, okay? I don't know that much else about the person who's going to get the ad. If I'm spending 150 quid, there's going to probably be 1,000 people that get to see the ad, maybe 10,000 people that get to see the ad at all. And so the price per click on that is going to be relatively small.
Yeah. Yep.
But that's the point. And that's why I don't worry about getting perfect data when I'm doing these early tests, because I'm going to be doing lots of tests.
Right.
Yeah.
And
I'm very much a believer in the 80-20 rule and spend as little as possible to get as much information as possible. There is a risk by using paid ads, by the way. If you use paid ads and you spend too much money, what you do is you burn your audience, so you don't get a halo effect when you launch the game.
Yeah.
Because they've seen it too much.
Yep.
There's no excitement, there's no new, there's no fresh. That can also be to your advantage to a tiny extent, that there's familiarity. But there is something about when you launch a game, the immediate impact, if it's fresh,
Yeah. Yep.
which is disproportionately effective. So the magic trick I'm trying to get you to think about is spend tiny amounts and never do it too often, because if you do, you lose the advantage you get from the Occam's razor of an ad, and you also burn your halo effect at the launch.
Yeah. No, excellent. And thanks for elaborating too, because I just want to make it clear that people are understanding the right intent in terms of, you know, what we're talking about here versus what we
I'm not talking about chucking money at ad companies.
Yeah.
I know I used to be Unity ads evangelist, but I'm not anymore. But the thing is, I learned from doing that why this works.
Yeah.
And again, it's basically it is simple. Why not use the most powerful learning technique on the planet? And it's a scientific method. And the scientific method says we set a hypothesis, we put a number to it before we do the test, and we find a way to test it with as perfect an experimental design as we can that eliminates bias.
Yep. And there you go.
Done.
Awesome. Well, Oscar, I really can't thank you enough for being here today. It has been a pleasure. Love the insight and information. Hey, if people, listeners, and whoever else are looking to get in touch, maybe need some help with some of the work they do, what are some ways that people can reach out, connect? Any links you could give us?
Easiest thing is to just Google Oscar Clarke Games and you will find me. I'm not the guitarist or the cyclist, but I'm the other Oscar Clarke that comes up top. Oscar Clarke Games, you'll find me. But equally, I'm on LinkedIn. If you're in the games industry, you're probably second degree connected to me. There's a very high certainty of that. I think the last time I had a third degree connection was 5 years ago. But yeah, anyway, that's just what happens when you're an evangelist for Unity for 5.5 years. I'm also a complicated sounding name on almost every social platform, and that's at Athanasius, Athanateus. It's an old role-playing game character, which I became my QuakeNet name when I was launching online gaming services back in the I didn't launch it. I took on online gaming services back in the dial-up modem days. And that name has stuck with me ever since. So it means undying, apparently. So
I like it. So
it was a role-playing vampire character I had back in the days of Vampire the Masquerade.
Love it.
And if anyone wants to know what I'll get up to with this stupid hat when I'm not talking about game development, I also run an actual play called The Anything Could Happen Show. But because of the Ellie Goulding song, you probably want to type Anything Could Happen podcast and you will find me.
Awesome. Well, can't thank you enough for that, folks. Show notes will have these links and ways to connect with Oscar. Oscar, it has been a pleasure. It's been great. Thank you so much.
Great talking to you too.
Hey everyone, thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action. A special thanks to Dakota Saw for Season 2's opening theme and Melissa Gellis for the new logo design. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners, and we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.